You're listening to Path of Love with David Youngren. To learn more about us, visit pathoflovecenter.com.
Welcome to the Path of Love. I am Marcus, and we're here with David Youngren, talking about his book, Awakening to I Am Love. We are moving on to part 4, the manifestation of your true self. He has a quote that says, "Our purpose here on earth, to manifest the very nature of our spirit, which is touched by the Spirit of God." Rumi. Let's talk to David about chapter 13. And chapter 13 is entitled, A Mindset of Love. How are you doing today, David?
You know, I'm doing really good. It's in the summertime, and it's life is good.
Life is good. Yes, it is.
Isn't it? Don't you think it's wonderful?
It is. I enjoy the summer a whole lot better because it's light outside a lot longer. So it's really nice to me. So let's talk about chapter 13, A Mindset of Love. And part 4 to your book. And part 4 to your book is the manifestation of your true self. What came of the title for part 4, Manifestation of Your True Self?
Well, we've been on this journey. So we started really with just asking some questions. And then the second part was about your false self, what we consider to be us and how we identify with the egoic mind. We have a sense of identity that is based on external conditioning, what people have told us, whether it is even subconsciously from our childhood on. There are certain expectations, there are certain thoughts have been added to us that then have defined us. So we talked about that a little bit, and that's not who we are at the very core. And then we talked about the awakening to our true self, the process of awakening. We actually went through a number of different things. We looked at it from the point of view of science. We looked upon it from the point of view of spirituality. We looked at Jesus and faith and meditation. We kind of covered a lot of different things in that third part of the book. Now, in the fourth part of the book, we're talking about what happens once you've experienced this transformation. When you begin to manifest your true self, if your true self is your spirit that is one with God, that is united in love with God, that is united in love with all and everyone, what happens? How does that change us? How can we expect things to be different in our lives? So that's really what we're talking about in this fourth part.
Yeah, you talk about, and that moves into chapter 13, A Mindset of Love. You talk about when you find your true self within, you gain a new view of yourself and of the world. So you've already, like the last chapter, spoke of meditation and things, but this one you've awakened basically, and now you're going through the things that happen on the other side, if that's the right word, the other side of awakening, is that correct?
Yes, I think that's very good. Yes.
All right. You also say Paul, ancient scribe, writes, mystically, in the mindset of grace, lifts us from an earthly fear-based perception of the heavenly views of love, where Christ is all and in all. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Well, we have to realize that once you awaken to who you are, your true self, you realize that your mind has been under the control of this egoic consciousness. And once you become more and more aware of this divine love within you, you gain what Paul referred to as the mind of Christ. Now, of course, this was not a religious terminology, so sometimes people misinterpret this and think of religion immediately. This is not what I'm referring to here. I'm talking about a transformation of how you see the world that is based on love, selfless, unconditional love, that you begin to see the world differently than you did before, rather than seeing it through the egoic consciousness. Your mind has now been enlarged. And so the primary guide of your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs are now love rather than fear. Your vision is enlarged. The limitations of the past are broken. And The old you seems like a distant past because there is this new person. So Paul talks about this. In other words, you begin now to see that Christ is all and in all. We no longer just worship the religion of Jesus, and it's not really the religion of Jesus, but it's the religion of Jesus followers. But we begin to see now the Christ that Jesus so demonstrated and showed us what Christ is. We begin to see Christ as Jesus saw it. I'm in the naked, I mean, all those people that society had ostracized, the society had were looking down upon. Jesus spoke of being in them, and we are lifted above this view of seeing things through the ego, but we now begin to see ourselves in all, and we'll begin to see God in all, and there's a transformation in the way we view and observe reality.
You used a great analogy with your charity called Juma's World. I thought it was really cool the way you described how you would take that long journey to your destination. Can you explain that a little bit more?
We started a charity called Juma's World that we help children and empower children in Tanzania. And most of our work has been located in the city of Tabora. Now, the city of Tabora is in the middle of Tanzania. And for many years, there was no flight going into that city. They were doing a lot of work. They were, it was just a gravel landing strip. And so it wasn't open for regular flights. But you could, of course, rent a plane or charter a small little plane that could land there. Mm-hmm. But I would always fly into this other city called Mwanza. Now, to drive from Mwanza to Tabora, they would always tell me that it would take 6 hours, but it always took 8 hours. And it was the most treacherous road you will ever find. There were big potholes, especially after it rained. And you would sit there in this Land Cruiser and you would feel every bump in the road. And the entire time you would be up and down and shaking, your head would hit the roof. And I'm thinking, like, why am I doing this? Why am I torturing myself coming to this place?
For 8 hours?
Beg your pardon?
For 8 hours?
For 8 hours. Why would I torture myself like this? And then you have to drive back again to get out of there. And I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. It was like sitting there and it's hot. The air conditioner is not working very well. It's dusty because now you got to keep the windows open to get some fresh air flowing in. And so you sitting there in this heat. It's a lot of dust and potholes everywhere, and it's just torture. So I'm looking at it. I'm not enjoying this. Life is miserable. How many ever gone through periods of misery in their life where you just kind of, people tell you, oh, life is beautiful. Life is good. Look how beautiful it is. You don't see any beauty because you're so stuck in your mind. We are so trapped in our mind and our thoughts and feeling sorry for ourselves and feeling like we're victims. Like I thought like I was a victim right there. But then one day I was planning again to go back because it's amazing how quickly you forget, right? Like you say, well, I'll never do this trip again. But then next year you go back again, or sometime later you go back again. And I thought, I'm going to see if I cannot find a better way to get there. And I did some research and I contacted this private charter airline. And they said that they would actually fly me because they were passing through to another city and they had workers going to this other city. So I could fly with them and they could land on this graveled landing strip. And so I flew with them and I sat in the cockpit and it was beautiful looking out. And I noticed, look how beautiful everything is. This landscape is amazing. The trees, the roads down there, the people. Look at the water holes, the potholes. I'm looking at all these things and I'm just mesmerized by the beauty of it. And it's amazing how my view had changed because now had like a heavenly perception. And so when we're talking about a mindset of love, what are we referring to? It's simply moving from that pothole mindset that is so stuck in feeling like you have been done wrong for even having to go to this place, and feeling sorry for yourself and communicating all kinds of negative stuff to yourself about why you're doing this, and getting angry and upset about it, and telling the guy, can you not miss some of these potholes, and all the different things that your mind goes through. And now I was just enjoying it. And I thought, that's exactly what happens when you awaken to divine love within you. When you become aware of this presence within you that permeates with love and grace and peace, you move away from that egoic consciousness where you see nothing but problems, where you see difficulties, and where you're looking for your own personal victories, where the ego somehow or another has to be enhanced. You just become aware of a whole new reality. And that's really what I'm referring to here. And this is what in biblical texts was referred to as the kingdom of heaven, but not just in biblical texts. There are many other texts as well that talks about this. It's when we exchange fear for love as the primary lens of perception. What used to trigger anger, anxiety, worry, loneliness, despair, and unhappiness will no longer face you as it did in the past. Your view of people will shift from negativity and judgment to hopeful and life-giving. You'll be more forgiving. You'll have more empathy for people. You will be more generous toward people because you see things so radically different. You have awakened to the Christ-centric consciousness. And that's what I'm talking about in this last segment of the book.
And in your analogy, just in real life, what you said makes you feel better. You're not upset. You're not tired. You're not depressed. You're not angry for going through the potholes any longer. And then at the same time, once you've awakened, you're not wanting to go back either. You don't want to go back to that area where the potholes are and that whole terrible road any longer.
You don't want to travel by land cruise. You want to travel by air. And it just, and of course, we're not talking literally here, but when you begin to think about that more deeply, that's really what we're referring to. Then most people are living trapped in their mind. So if you think of that as traveling on the road in a land cruiser with potholes, but when you begin to awaken to your truest and deepest self, your spirit, and that recognize that you're one with God, you actually lift it up into that airplane and you begin to see reality through the lens of God.
So you next I'm going and talking about exploring the mindset a little bit further. And you have a subcategory called the confident mind. And you talk about rejection a lot. Can you explain a little bit more about that? Rejection
is probably one of the most common emotional wounds that any of us will experience in life. If you think about it, when a spouse leaves you, or you get passed up for a promotion, or you get fired, or you get excluded from a social gathering, or you're the last person to be picked for your basketball team, or when you have 10 guys standing around and somebody's picking, and you just know that you're the worst player, and not just that, it's also with dating and like young people go through. The emotional pain we can feel can be absolutely paralyzing. And what is interesting, I began to look into this some more, and I realized that our bodies, we all experience physical pain if someone punches you in the head, you will experience physical pain. Now, what fMRI studies indicate is that the area of the brain that activates physical pain is also triggered when we experience rejection. Isn't that amazing? Mm-hmm. So rejection, they have concluded, is the cause of so much violence, especially in teenagers, even more so than drugs and poverty and even gang affiliation. School shootings, so you study school shootings, and even of violence against women are so often linked to rejection. Of course, most people will not have those severe effects, or will not suffer those severe effects of rejection, but they still go through emotional instability. They become critical of themselves. They're depressed. They're disgusted with other people. and they even begin to self-destruct. And when you go through rejection, you think about it, even your IQ is lowered because your mind is so filled with this anger and irritation and disgust and everything else that you're not thinking clearly. And then your body language is affected, your social behavior is affected. And I don't know if you've ever seen this, and you probably may even in yourself, if I can look back at times when I've been rejected, you go into kind of a shell and you spend less time with friends and family. And, when people look at us, it's hard to make eye contact with people. We have a tough time smiling. We look down rather than keeping our head held high because
you feel ashamed or
exactly. It's a shame, right? We feel there's something wrong with us. Someone rejected us. And so we go back to what we talked about earlier, because someone rejected us. We feel this shame, right? We feel this insecurity about ourselves. We feel like we're not worthy to be loved and accepted, right? And there's something wrong with us. And that creates all these emotions. It's almost like a form of punishing ourselves. So other people look down upon us. We have these feelings. We interpret what other people think and feel about us. And now we have to punish ourselves with depression, with anger, with anxiety, with feelings of loneliness and despair. And if that doesn't work, well, then we have to punish somebody else. We have to punish the people who did us wrong, or we have to take it out on somebody. And
the person
so you
who
see
rejected
this being, yeah, because we see this played out all the time.
So changing that mindset of rejection is done how?
Well, think about it this way. When you awaken to love, because remember, the ego seeks to enhance itself, right? The ego wants to be seen, to be stand out, to be enhanced, to feel good, to be better than, to be on this continuum of knowledge of good and evil. It needs to be on the good side. So when we feel low, when we feel on the negative side, what do? We want to cause suffering to other people. We want other people to suffer as much as we do. And so we project our own self-hatred onto others. But when you awaken to love, what happens? Your confidence is no longer based on what people do to you and for you. Like, it doesn't matter whether people reject you. It doesn't matter how people think about you. It doesn't make a difference, because there is a security, there's a confidence that you have because you're secure in love and you don't take it personal. For example, when you smile at somebody, let's say you're smiling at somebody and they don't smile back at you. Well, the first thought that people have is, what's wrong with me? Why are they not smiling? So we feel a sense of rejection, right? But when we awaken to love within us, then we don't need for them to respond to us. We are smiling out of the overflow of our heart, and to allow this divine flow to flow through us into others. So whether they smile back at us or not doesn't make a difference.
So you don't need the affirmation. You don't need that person to give you something back, because you're giving what's in your heart just because that egoic mind's gone and you're awakened to the love.
Exactly. And so then the amazing thing is people will reject you less, because you just have this confidence about you. So you walk around and you're smiling at people, you're happy. And how people respond back to you is immaterial. But what happens, and I've seen this myself, what happens is that it's like this, there's this attraction about you. Because of that, people say, why is that person so happy and confident? And even when I'm rude and miserable or whatever, they still act like nothing. They still have compassion. They're still happy. What is that? It's because there is an awakening that's taking place inside of you, where you're aware of your truest and deepest self, your union with God. And that's where you draw your strength from. And that is why you're confident, whatever the external situation is, however people reject you, there's still confidence, because your confidence is not based on what other people do to you, but is based on the security of being one with God.
Well, speaking of strength and security, another mindset is the strong mind. And you talk about vulnerability. And there's a lot of people who are afraid to be vulnerable. Can you elaborate on that?
Most of us have been taught, maybe so the older we are, maybe perhaps, that vulnerability is a weakness. We appear weak because we have to portray perfection. So we always assume, and we see this, and I'm not going to point fingers at anybody, but if you study some of the politicians today, you can see that. They want to project strength, never show weakness, never let people in and see what you're truly like. And that is actually a sign of weakness. It's a sign of the ego keeping us imprisoned, keeping us in locks and bounds, where we're unable to really be an expression of love to others. I remember this young lady one time, I always try so hard to be strong. I don't let anyone in because I'm afraid I will be rejected. Whenever someone gets close to me enough to see my vulnerabilities, I find the excuse to run away from the relationship. That's really what she was doing. And she was filled with so much tears because we have been hoodwinked into thinking that flawless perfection is the only way we will be loved and accepted. That's what we think. The ego believes that the only way you're going to be loved is by being perfect. So when anybody begins to see our failures and flaws, the ego then creates impenetrable masks that show off our abilities, talents, knowledge, and wealth. We want to be seen as someone who's made it. I'm self-made. Look how much money I have. Look at the cars I drive. Look at the house I live in. Look at how I'm flying in my private jet. We have all these different things, and we begin to identify with them because we are afraid to be exposed. Because flawless perfection, or whatever that perfection is how we have to portray ourselves in order to feel a sense of love and acceptance from others. But reality is different. Isn't it amazing? We're just in the midst of Olympics. We're recording this usually about a week before it's being aired. So for those who are keeping track of where we're at, we're during the middle of the Olympics. And so Simone Biles withdrew from the team competition in gymnastics, but also from the individual event. Now, we don't know what's going to happen, at least at this particular point. By the time people listen to this, they will know. Because of mental issues. Now, it took tremendous strength for her to stand up and speak about this. I mean, I can sympathize with her. I can understand the pressure she has gone through. She was projected to win, I don't know, was it 5 or 6 gold medals? Mm-hmm. The entire nation's hopes are on her for years and years and years. She has been under this stress. Everybody expects her to win. Everybody talks to her. Everybody wants to be close to her because of it. She has been living under this enormous pressure from everybody. I mean, at least that's what it appears like. What a response that we have given her. And I see this, even some of my friends on Facebook are really applauding her because people can identify with it. Mm-hmm. She is supposed to project this perfection.
Mm-hmm. And strength.
Like the greatest gymnast of all time with this incredible skill. And suddenly she showed us she is human with flaws and everything else. And not everybody, some can be very mean and treat her, I'm sure, disparagingly. But I think many of us feel her pain and can relate to it. And it's a strength rather than a weakness.
Mm-hmm. It is. And with that vulnerability and that mindset change of having a strong mind, you're saying that being vulnerable makes your mind even stronger, makes you a stronger person. Is that correct?
Yes. And this is the reason why. Because think about it. What is the root cause of needing to be perfect. It's fear. Fear that you will be exposed as a fraud. It's fear that you will not live up to people's expectations. It's rooted in fear. And once you allow your imperfections to be seen, the fear is gone. The fear leaves you, and now there is strength. Now there is a strength from within. Now you get in touch again with love. You get in touch with your deeper self. Even look at Simone, look at her face. Did you see that? After the team competition, she was so happy for her teammates. She was like a burden had lifted.
Exactly.
And I took such joy in that. I mean, I was just like, I got so happy for her to see how happy she was. She was celebrating her teammates, how well they were doing. And I thought, oh, wow, this is amazing. Because the fear was gone. She didn't have the pressure anymore. It was okay now. Now everybody knew that she struggled. And that's what it does. It frees you. And now you're able to then experience healing. You see, this is what happens. Now love will heal your heart. Now love will heal your sense of identity. So it doesn't mean that you will never achieve anything after that. It means the opposite. Now, when love heals you, you no longer need to be validated through perfection. You are already validated from within. So now you can give your best without the fear of failure.
So which moves on to the peace of mind, because you've already released and the vulnerability is laid out there. The you is laid out there with no shame. And you're free from that. Now it's time for peace of mind. How do you explain peace of mind?
Well, let me just give you a little bit of a preface here to the peace of mind. I think I like to use that word just to look at you and then see what your response will be, because we use it a few times, almost like an inside joke here. But whenever we are attacked, our immediate response is either fight or flight, right? Most of it is relating to a physical attack. So for example, if there's a lion standing in front of you, well, it's good that you have a fight or flight kind of response. There's a physical threat against your body. So now you either have the option to fight the lion or try to get away from the lion, right? Those are the two options. But there is also a psychological fight or flight mode. And that has to do with mental stress. So this is not rooted in a threat to your body, but this is an attack on your sense of self, your egoic mind, your conceptualized self. When someone criticizes, attacks, or pressures you, it activates anxiety, worry, and stress. And you will either fight back in defense or run away from the conflict. And since each reaction, whether you fight or whether you run away, is rooted in fear, it does not lead to inner freedom. It doesn't lead to conflict resolution. It in fact sinks you further into the claws of the ego, which alienates you from unconditional love. So that's really what I'm talking about here.
Well, you can use your Simone Biles, analogy again on this, where when she released to the public that a mental situation was going on with her, she could have just picked up her stuff and left. She could have just fought with whatever the critics are saying. Instead, she went out to support her team and felt more free and more at peace with the decision that she did, that she created.
It was somehow or another, I'm not sure. Of course, we're speculating right now because we don't know really what's going on. But at the same time, there is a principle there that I think is very, very true. When you're conscious of divine love, your comeback to criticism and personal attacks is not motivated anymore by need to defend your sense of self, which we understand is the ego. If you do something that is wrong, you can just apologize. But if you're unjustly charged, you also know that the reason why people are upset is not so much to do with you as it is about themselves. You triggered something in them. You triggered an insecurity in them. So I'm sure that there are people who are upset with her not participating, but that can also be because their sense of identity is so deeply rooted in being Americans, or whatever the case may be, that it felt like, when she was winning, we are winning. And so that was threatened. So they could be angry about that, but you realize that that's what it is. Whenever there's a sense of threat against you as a person, or your sense of self, your identity, it likes to push back. But when you really awaken to love, well, you either run away and hide. But when you really wake up to love, you're just free, as you talked about. You're free to celebrate with your teammates. You're free to see them achieve greatness. It changes everything.
You spoke about people getting into situations or getting hurt or unjustly accused of certain things. But you also said something that was very hard for a lot of people to do. And that was, silence is sometimes the best response to people's bitterness and pain. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm sure everybody loves you, Marcus. But I have had a number of times people send me nasty emails, or they send me things through Facebook, a message, and they speak poorly about me. That doesn't happen that often, but it does happen. Now, what do we do? Especially if you post something on Facebook, like sometimes I post stuff on Facebook and not everybody agrees with me. I don't know why that would be, but they don't agree with me. And they bring up arguments, and most of the time I don't respond. And people wonder, why don't you respond? You need to defend yourself. No, I don't need to defend myself. Why do I need to defend myself? Now, if I think it would help them, I would. But most of the time, the reason why I want to defend myself is to defend my honor and prove to people that I'm right. But I don't need to be proven right. Love doesn't need to be proven right. Love only seeks to bring wholeness in their relationship. So if I start arguing with that person, that's not going to bring wholeness. I may feel good about myself because I won the argument. I debated better than that person who wrote something, but I don't do it. Rarely do I do it, because I know that it will only strengthen my ego, and it will not be love flowing. So most of the time I don't say anything. Now, there are times when I would respond, especially I do it more in private. So if somebody says something to me, I would go to them in private and I will respond. And it depends on who it is. If it's someone that I know very well, that I also know look up to me, and they have a concern, and whatever, they've known me for a long time, and they looked up to me, and now I disappointed them, I respond not because I need to be proven right, but because I don't want them. I feel for them. I feel a sense of, I feel saddened for them that they feel the way they do. And then I respond. But this is rooted in divine love. Now, I'm not saying I'm perfect in this, but what I'm saying is, when you begin to awaken, it's like Jesus. Jesus didn't defend himself. Mm-hmm. When he was accused before Pontius Pilate, he didn't say anything. He said nothing. It says he was silent. Jesus didn't respond to the accusations. Now, when he finally responded to Pilate, he basically prompted Pilate to look inside himself and find the truth, which is amazing. So think about it. How many of us, and I mean, this must have completely dumbfounded Pontius Pilate, because he was a judge. And as a judge, you have a lot of people standing in front of you, and they will always try to find someone else to blame for their problems. They will always they lie, and they betray a friend or do anything to get off the hook. So this must have so dumbfounded this Pontius Pilate that the response of Jesus was to say nothing against his accusers. And I think that's how love acts.
You say a mindset of love defies our logic and runs contrary to every impulse of the ego. Yet in the end, love always wins. That's very interesting. And then also in the respects to what Jesus said to Pontius Pilate, you know that love won in the end.
If love is not the ultimate reality of the universe is doomed, and our very existence is here is meaningless. But that's not what I believe. I believe the ultimate reality is love. And there is something within each and every one of us. Have you ever noticed this? I've noticed this in people. Even people that we disagree with, even people who can get upset. And we criticize and we feel terrible about. But even go and talk to your enemy after a couple of years and you're really in need of something, you ask them for something, and they will probably respond and do it for you. Because ultimately, there's something within each and every one of us that calls out for love, that calls out to give love, to bring wholeness, to bring unity, to bring forgiveness. I think naturally all of us desire to unify with others. Now, so many of us are so deeply buried in our ego that we cannot see that. But at the very core of our being, we all seek love and to love others, because that's who we are at the very core.
Mm-hmm. So you move on to the non-judgmental mind and how people being judged and about things can really, cause an issue there. Can you elaborate on that?
Really what I'm referring to is that the mind, you analyze your mind and just observe your mind for a day. Mm-hmm. And you will notice that your mind gravitates toward negative judgment about yourself and others. It just rises out of nowhere.
Just look in the mirror. I just look in the mirror at myself a couple of times and I can judge myself 4 or 5 times a day. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And we judge others. We judge conversation. We have this inner dialogue and we someone did us wrong. We were offended or something and we judged them. If someone cuts you off in traffic, mm-hmm. we judge them. We just, that person cannot drive. It could be something totally not relating. Maybe they were in a hurry to get somewhere and their mind is distracted. We don't know, but we immediately judge them. When someone doesn't perform to our expectations, we are inclined to form judgment about our own performance and the situations we find ourselves and the people that we encounter. We instantly make conclusions about people or forms of judgment about people based on their looks, their clothes, their race, their gender, their wealth, their job, their nationality, their fame, even the jewelry they wear. It can be so many different things. But the interesting thing is that the judgments that we make often convey more about us than them. And there is a reason for that, Marcus. And the reason is the ego that seeks to feel special and superior seeks to make a snap verdict about whether that individual will enhance our sense of self. So let's say a gold medalist came by your door and walking down your street and stopped at your house or stopped at my house. What would the ego want to do? Get a selfie, a picture with him.
People have got to see this. No one's
because people want to see me next to this guy.
Exactly.
Right? So we judged that person as someone that would enhance me. We really don't care about that person, but we care about how that person is going to make me look in front of all my friends and all my relatives. But let's now play it the other way. Let's say that this famous athlete came down the road and your neighbors were all outside looking, And now they come to you and they completely ignore you and turn away from you. You try to speak to them and say something and they won't respond. There's like, they don't like you for some reason. You get the impression that they don't like you. You don't know whether that's the case or not. Now, guess what happened? You make a judgment about them that is not necessarily based on facts, because they could be caught up in some other thing. They're caught up in their own world. So now you got to find a fault with that person that you could find no fault with before, because they have made you inferior about yourself. They have diminished your sense of self in front of you and in front of others. So now you have to diminish them to somehow or another equalize the injustice done to you. And you see how this ego works like that? Mm-hmm. And so like you can use this as another example. I use this example in the book that, you know, if you meet an attractive person that, you know, especially when we're young, you're someone that seemed interested in you. Now you feel good about yourself. And so you make a favorable judgment about that person. But if the person gives you the cold shoulder, your sense of self is threatened. Mm-hmm. And you will therefore subconsciously try to find something in that person to criticize and complain about. It's very common. And we also, another way we judge people is by placing them in a category, giving them a label. So for example, politically, are you a Republican or a Democrat? So if you're a Republican and they say they're a Democrat, you check inside, you make a judgment about them that they are not as enlightened as you are. They don't know what you know. And this goes on all the time in our minds. And notice how one of the first things that people ask you, especially someone who has a great job, they ask what you do. And then they make a judgment to see whether they are further along than you on this continuum of good and evil, or if they're further down. And if they feel a sense of further ahead of you, then they may not pay attention to you. But if they feel that you are further ahead and you are nice to them, now they will seek to get close to you to enhance their sense of self. You see how this ego plays tricks with us all the time? But there is a better way, and that is really what I'm referring to in the book, as you, I'm sure, will ask me soon.
And then you also drag people into your judgments. So say your example of the neighbors, then you go back to talk to your other neighbor across the street that you're friends with, and you tell them about, oh, did you see what they did? Why are they acting this way? What's wrong with them? And then you create a bigger situation. So being non-judgmental is, how do you move forward into that direction?
Well, of course, you can't stop yourself from being judgmental. It's impossible. Mm-hmm. The only thing you can do is to begin to go down that path toward awakening. And that's what I've been trying to help people go through. I can't help anybody awaken. There's no magic formula. There's no 3 or 4 steps, follow these 15 steps, and suddenly you're going to be an awakened person. No, I can't do it. It's impossible. Mm-hmm. But what I can do is I can talk about it and provide little clues here and there. And if people truly want to be free, if they truly want to be free from the non-judgmental mind, or from the judgmental mind, because the judgmental mind is the cause of so much pain and suffering in their lives. You think about how much time we spend judging people, and what do you feel at those moments when you judge other people? You don't feel good. You feel terrible. You feel angry, and it leads to depression. It leads to all kinds of toxic emotions that can be so devastating and debilitating. But when you awaken to this presence within you, when you awaken to the kingdom of God that is within you, when you awaken to your true self, when you awaken to God within you, when you awaken to your oneness with God, and then you see it in others, when you awaken to God in the person that has done you wrong, what happens then? You're free. You don't judge them anymore for the wrong that they did to you, because what they did to you, you realize they did because they were not awakened to begin with. But you have a sense of compassion for them. You have empathy for them. And there is a sense of forgiveness that flows because You see them not for how they act, but you see them for who they are at their very core, their true essence that is one with God.
So, for example, the way Jesus said on the cross, please forgive them because they not know what they do.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
Mm.
I mean, he had every reason to judge those people who had done him wrong, but that's not what he did. They don't know what they're doing. He could have said, they don't know who they are. Forgive, because they don't know who they are. It's so radically a different way to live.
It is. So you go into a story in here and you talk about the Muslim premier, and you end the chapter with that story. And I think you should maybe share it with everybody here.
Well, kind of, I didn't know exactly how to end this chapter, so I included a story from way back. I was speaking in Tanzania, and I think it was Tanzania. I was speaking in a community where half the people were Muslim. Actually, 40% of the population was Muslim, 40% were Christian, and 20% belonged to some other religion. And so there was not tension in the city, but I was there to speak. And of course, I had these great meetings with tens of thousands of people. And when you have great crowds, usually a lot of times you have people who have political power come out because they like to stand in front of a crowd and talk to get their message out because they're looking for votes, right? So at this particular meeting we had so many tens of thousands of people there. And the local premier or provincial premier or governor, whatever you want to call it, for that particular region, for that whole region, they call it something different. I don't know exactly the terminology they use. Well, he was Muslim. So we were waiting for him, and I was supposed to speak, and I had to finish at a certain time. So we were waiting for him to show up because this was the first meeting, and he was supposed to inaugurate the event, and he was supposed to speak to the crowd. And finally, about 25 minutes before we were supposed to end, because it gets dark and you're not allowed to have public meetings when it's dark outside, he showed up with his motorcade, all these different vehicles. He gets up there and he stands there and talks, and I'm thinking, oh, he's talking on my dime. I paid for this event, like I'm making judgment. He's just trying to score a point here. This Muslim guy. And you have to understand, coming from this Christian background, I had like this thing against Muslims, that was like, oh, well, who are they anyhow? And so he went on and spoke for a while. So when it came time for me to speak, I got up. And, I've done this for a while, speaking in front of crowds like that. So I turned to him and I turned to the crowd and I said, it's so great to have this political leader here. Isn't that great, everybody? And then I said, I've seen people from around the world. I've seen this. This is like back I think it was in the 20 years ago or so, and how some of the most influential leaders, the president of the United States, he's a Christian. He's come to know Christ. I'm standing up saying that it's so good to see our political leaders. And of course, he's a Muslim. So I could see how irritated he is with me. He says, you are manipulating the crowd. You're making a point, a statement. And I knew I was. I was retaliating against him for being late and taking my time and giving me 5 to 7 minutes at the end to conclude and do everything. And so I knew I was. So this played out. And of course, the people didn't know. They're all cheering. They think this is great, right? It's just like, but he knows. I look at him and he is just sitting there stone-faced on the stage behind me. And I'm just smiling, enjoying it. Well, what happened the following day, I got this visit from the local, some immigration department, and they were asking for my passport. And I think I've been to this country so many times, never been asked for my passport. So they took my passport and said, we need to make sure that you are legally entitled to have meetings here, that you're legal to do all these different things. I thought, oh no, this governor, he's so angry with me. He's now going to pay back. I paid back, and now he's going to, the retaliation. It's like this cycle of I'm going to pin you and I'm going to make your life miserable. I'm going to cause you pain because you caused me pain. So now I thought, oh my goodness, what have I done? So I had this inner prompting. Thankfully, I was able to come to a place of peace within and just become aware of love. And I started feeling this love and compassion toward this man. So I went down to the offices, and I noticed his office was right across from the immigration office, which is kind of interesting. And so we asked if we could meet with him. And of course, he didn't want to meet with us. But then the president or the vice president of the country had actually died that same week. So I made a sizable donation, and you had to write it in the book. And so I thought, I'm going to make a sizable donation in the fund of this guy, whatever. And within 10 minutes, I was allowed in. And I could tell he was really, you tell when someone is angry and upset, right? Like they have this stern look on their face. And he says, okay, let's get on with it. What do you want? So I reached out my hand and I said to him, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for coming yesterday to the meeting. And for 2 or 3 minutes, I just spoke good things. I spoke with words of kindness and generosity and love and appreciation for him. And I could see how his countenance changed on his face. And he became happy. And he said, well, thank you very much for coming to our city. We so much appreciate that. And after about 15 minutes of just chatting and talking, I left. And then 2 hours later, they came from immigration and said, oh, everything is fine. Here are your passports.
Wow.
And here is a point. Here is the real point that I'm trying to make with the story. How would our interactions with one another, not just on a local level in our families, not just in our local communities, but nation to nation, religion to religion, race to race, how would that change if we would awaken to divine love and see ourselves in the other, rather than making judgments about them that is based on our own insecurities, our own fears, and our own egoic thinking? What would happen when we awaken to love within us?
And you explain it correctly in the last paragraph. Judgmental attitudes and hypocritical actions tear us apart, but the attitude of words that reveal selfless, divine love bring healing, restoration, wholeness between people, families, and nations.
Yeah. A new person emerges. You are being transformed by love to be love. Isn't that the key to a better world? Isn't that the key to better relationships? Isn't that key to better health in your own life? Isn't that key to feeling freedom? It's the key to everything. When we awaken to this divine presence within us, the more there is a unity, the more there is an awakening of our oneness, the more we see God manifested in the world through us. That is the way to peace in the world.
Well, you described it so elegantly in this chapter 13, The Mindset of Love. We look forward to meeting with you next week to speak about the final chapter to your book, Awakening to I Am Love.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast of Path of Love with David Youngren. This podcast is produced by the Path of Love Center, thanks to the generosity of our donors. If you enjoyed this podcast, consider rating it, writing a review, and sharing it with a friend. Together, we can grow an inclusive community around the transformational work of love. To learn more about Path of Love and get daily wisdom seeds sent to your email inbox, visit pathoflovecenter.com. You can also download David Youngren's guided audio meditation, Healing Stillness, for free at our website. From all of us at Path of Love, may love, joy, and peace be with you always.